Hi everyone, welcome to the second kombucha video where we talk about bottling and second fermentation, flavoring, all that good stuff. This is for people who want their kombucha or jun extra carbonated. It is like a tiny bit carbonated after the first fermentation, but it's not really noticeably like a soda. It's not really like a soda carbonated. So if you want carbonation in your kombucha or jun, this is the video for you. And if you want to add flavoring in and learn how to do that, this video is also for you. For this process, you will need flavorings. So you can use tea, juice, fruit. You can use dried fruit or fresh fruit. You can use spices, herbs, powders, fresh ginger, crystallized ginger. You can use so many different things for flavoring. You'll also need bottles. I like to use these flip top bottles because when you, and we'll talk about this, but when you actually seal the bottle to do the second fermentation process, what you want to do is build the carbonation in the bottle, and so these are really helpful for that because they're super airtight. So you'll need more sweetener for the second fermentation process. The SCOBY has consumed quite a bit of the sweetener that you originally put into the first fermentation process of the kombucha or jun. So you want to add a little bit more, about a tablespoon or so, for the second fermentation, just to give the bacteria that extra push in order to carbonate it. You'll need a funnel or a measuring cup. I'm pretty good at pouring into the bottle just with a measuring cup, but some people need a funnel. So if you have one, that might be helpful for you. So first of all, wash your hands. I already did. For my flavorings, I'm doing some dried herbs for one of them. You can either do dried herbs or you can make a tea, depending on what herbs you're using. So say you want to do a root beer kombucha. Root beer kombucha, you're going to get the best result if you brew a tea out of those herbs first. So in herbal root beer, which is originally what root beer was, at least our modern recipe of it, is commonly burdock root, dandelion root, sarsaparilla root, sassafras root, birch bark, and then I like to add medicinal mushrooms in it, like chaga is really good in it because it has kind of like a vanilla-y flavor. And then like wintergreen oil and a little bit of vanilla extract. So you would brew that tea, and then the sweeteners you might want to use with it is like maple syrup or molasses, because those have a bit more kind of rich flavoring, or like a rich cane sugar. So you would also adjust the sweeteners for the kind of flavoring that you're using. But if you're using fresh or dried herbs like mint or rosemary, or I'm using hibiscus, I'm using some hibiscus, rose, and a herb called damiana. And so those are all, like, you can easily brew those if you wanted to even do a cold infusion. So just brewing a tea in cold water. So they're soft enough herbs to be able to do that, and you'll still get lots of flavor and benefits from those herbs just by, like, without having to do a tea with them first. I'm going to add some lavender flowers to the hibiscus, damiana, and rose. So it's going to be really nice and floral. And then the second type of flavoring that I'm going to do is I'm going to do a juice. So it's a grapefruit and lemon juice. And then I'm going to add some cayenne pepper and some ginger powder to it. So it's going to be like a spicy citrus kombucha. Other ideas for flavoring, you could do hibiscus lemonade. So that would be a really refreshing one for summer. You could do lime and rosemary. Rosemary is really good with all different types of fruits. Like you could do citrus, you could do berry, you could do mango if you wanted. Basil and blueberry. Basil is another herb that's really delicious with a lot of different types of fruits. Berry ginger is a classic one. It's super yummy. Ginger lemon root beer, like I said, or chaga vanilla. So you would brew chaga tea, which is a medicinal mushroom that doesn't really grow wild on the island, but you can find it in parts of northern BC. It grows on birch trees, and it has a really lovely flavor. It's also really great for you. So you could make like medicinal kombucha if you wanted to. And then also a little bit of vanilla extract in there. You can also do something simple, just like a little bit of vanilla extract or just some crystallized ginger. Crystallized ginger, because it has a sweetener already on it, it's a really great, like it makes the kombucha really fizzy. And then you can also brew other teas, like you could do a chai tea or you could do an Earl Grey tea. Yeah, lots of different options. So I want to use honey for the base of, for the sweetener for both of my bottles. However, you can use any type of sweetener you want. In this process, it's not really so much about using specific types of sweeteners because the SCOBY isn't digesting anything. It's just the kombucha doing its second fermentation in the bottles. And so you could do any type of cane sugar, you could do coconut sugar, maple syrup, stevia if you wanted, you could do dates, you could do figs, and if you're using a lot of fruit or a lot of fruit juice, then you may not even need to add another sweetener. And that also depends on how sweet your kombucha is. So if you ferment it for a less amount of time in the first fermentation process, so say you like it a little bit sweeter and you ferment it for 6 days, then you won't need as much sweetener in your second fermentation process because there's already enough sugar that the SCOBY hasn't yet digested, so you don't need to add more. If your kombucha in the first fermentation process is quite sour, there may not be any going back from that. So there's a point that you reach where it's just perfectly sweet enough and just perfectly sour enough. And that's the point I like my kombucha to be at and when I think it's ready. However, basically, once the SCOBY has digested all of the sugars present in the jar, it will convert to vinegar. So, like, after a certain point, it doesn't matter how much more sweetener you add in your second fermentation process, it's just going to taste like vinegar. And so I've had to dump out numerous batches of kombucha because I just left it for too long and forgot about it. I have friends who make salad dressings and things like that. They keep their kombucha vinegar, and you could do, different types of herbal infusions and things like that. Like you can use it just like you use apple cider vinegar. So for me, my kombucha that I brewed is perfectly sour, perfectly sweet. What I do is I add about a tablespoon of sweetener to this batch, especially for my second fermentation, especially because I'm doing herbs in one of mine. So there's no fruit going into this. And in fact, hibiscus is quite sour and rose is a little bit bitter. So I want a little bit of extra sweetness in this brew. So I heated up some water, and this is going to be helpful in dissolving my honey. And I just do a little bit, like this much. So this is about half of a cup for 2 batches, and then I'll split this in half. So I'll do half for one bottle, half for the other. And I'll do about 2 tablespoons of honey. And then you can stir that in. And this is just easier than putting the honey directly in the bottle, because obviously honey doesn't dissolve that well in room temperature or cold liquid. You can also do this with your sugar. So if you're just using cane sugar, you can also do this. I also recommend doing this with molasses or maple syrup. Maple syrup dissolves a bit better than honey, but in a pinch though, if you're just doing cane sugar and you're kind of in a rush, you can just add it to the bottle and then shake it afterwards, and the sugar eventually dissolves. So for this first bottle, I'm going to add in my hibiscus, rose, and damiana. Keep in mind you want to keep your herbs, if you are just doing loose herbs, you want to keep them like fairly small because they do expand in the bottle, and you'll have to strain them out when the fermentation process finishes and you want to drink your kombucha. And I'm going to add in my lavender flowers. If you're using lavender, I recommend just using a little bit because it is pretty strong. And then I'm going to pour in my honey for this batch. And then I'm going to pour in my kombucha. I put my kombucha in a measuring cup from the last batch. So this is ready brewed kombucha, ready to be flavored. And you just fill it up all the way. Also, another thing, if you want carbonated kombucha or jun, but you don't want flavoring in it, then basically you just don't add any herbs or spices or fruit or anything like that. You just add a little bit of extra sweetener, and then you put your top on and give it a little shake, and then you're going to leave this on your counter for about 2 or 3 days, depending on what's in there. Some things will ferment more quickly, and it'll become carbonated and delicious. So yeah, same thing if you don't want to add any flavorings or anything like that.